All right, so today we're going deep on something that, well, it kind of sneaks up on everybody, right?
Okay, yeah.
It's this idea that, like, even after you've, achieved some pretty big things in life, you still got to face this whole other set of challenges that come with, well, getting older. Your
Yeah.
abilities change and
Right, right. Like you've climbed this mountain, you're at the top, feeling great, but then you realize there's this like whole other range you hadn't even seen before.
exactly. And it can be especially tough for people who've been high achievers,
Yeah.
the ones who are used to pushing limits and exceeding expectations.
Absolutely.
And to dig into all of this, we've got this really fascinating piece called From Strength to Strength. I believe it's a PDF.
Yeah, that's the one.
So in this deep dive, we're going to try to figure out why this kind of decline can be so darn hard for those high achievers we were talking about,
Hmm.
and unpack this whole concept of a second curve. I mean, what even is that?
That's a good question.
And most importantly, we're going to try to pull out some really concrete, practical things that you
Oh.
can actually do
Right.
to navigate this whole phase of life, Not just survive it, but actually thrive.
Yeah. And we're aiming to make this like a cheat sheet almost. Like here's the distilled wisdom from the text so you don't have to climb that whole mountain yourself, so to speak.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And I think a great place to start is with this really powerful anecdote the author opens with. Okay, imagine you're on a plane and you see this older man just radiating wisdom, someone who's clearly reached the pinnacle of success in their field, universally admired.
Okay. Got it.
But then there's this quiet moment, and he seems to express this, like longing for death. It's heavy stuff. But what makes it even more striking is what happens next.
Yeah.
The pilot, you can tell he's a lifelong fan of this guy,
Mm-hmm.
goes up to him and says, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know how much your work has meant to me." And suddenly, this older man's face just lights up. He's beaming. He's clearly still finding meaning in that recognition from his past.
Wow.
So it raises this big question. How can someone who's achieved so much still feel this kind of deep despair?
It's almost like this gap, right, between how the world sees us and how we feel inside, especially as we get older, and our abilities kind of shift.
Exactly.
And one thing the author really stresses is that this book isn't just for him. He felt this urge to share what he learned. Like he'd stumbled onto some secrets for a good life, especially in those later years, and he wanted to share them.
Right, right.
And he makes a really important point, too. Unlike the kind of competition that often drives us to succeed earlier in life, he says the stuff that brings real joy and purpose later on, well, it's not a limited resource.
Oh, interesting.
There's enough to go around. Everyone can tap into that.
Okay, so let's dive into this whole decline thing.
Yeah.
The book starts by throwing out some pretty heavy-hitting examples,
Like who?
like Charles Darwin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the father of evolution. He publishes On the Origin of Species at 50 after spending decades working on natural selection.
Huge accomplishment.
Massive, world famous, ends up buried like a national hero.
Right.
But get this, in his later years, he's like increasingly unhappy. His work just doesn't do it for him anymore.
Huh.
He even says straight up that he's lost the heart and the strength for those big new investigations he used to love.
That's really striking, isn't it? Like, here's this guy who changed the way we understand the natural world, secured his place in history, but he's just not finding that same personal satisfaction anymore.
No.
It makes you wonder, right? Like, maybe those goals we chase early on, maybe they aren't what's going to fulfill us in the long run.
That's a good point. And then there's this guy, Paul Dirac,
Yeah.
a Nobel Prize-winning physicist.
Okay, I know Dirac.
And he actually wrote this kind of dark little poem saying that physicists are better dead than living still once they're past 30.
Whoa. Okay, that's a bit much, even for a physicist, don't you think?
Right.
But Dirac, I mean, talk about an early achiever. By 30, this guy had come up with like a fundamental theory in quantum field mechanics, written The Principles of Quantum Mechanics, and was a chaired professor at Cambridge. I mean, his most revolutionary work was, well, basically done by the time he hit 30.
It's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
And even though he kept working, his later contributions just didn't have that same impact.
So it's like there's this pattern, right? An early peak in fields that really demand this intense analytical ability, what we'll talk about later as fluid intelligence, and then things kind of level off or even decline.
Right, right.
And Dirac's poem, I mean, it's definitely provocative.
Yeah.
But I think it points to a real awareness of this trajectory, at least in his field.
So this pattern of decline, apparently it's so widespread that a researcher named Dean Keith Simonton actually created a whole model to illustrate it. Yeah, for a creative and academic career specifically. He crunched a ton of data and came up with this graph that basically shows this average decrease in work output after a career kicks off. It's kind of sobering when you see it laid out like that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It makes you think that maybe this whole decline thing isn't just a few isolated cases of people being unhappy.
Right. Simonton's research provides like a bigger picture view, right? Backed by data. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, this isn't just Darwin and Dirac being grumpy old men.
Yeah.
It's like this natural ebb and flow in a lot of fields. And I think that can be helpful,
Oh, for sure.
just to adjust our expectations a little bit.
Absolutely. And, it's not just those historical figures either. The book brings in voices from today.
Yeah.
You've got a university administrator freaking out because, software is about to make their job obsolete.
Yikes.
You've got this super successful female journalist, she's in her 50s, talking about how hard it is to stay relevant these days.
Right, great.
It's like this real-time anxiety about, losing your professional edge.
Yeah, it shows that this fear of becoming obsolete, it's not just limited to academia or science. It's in all these fast-changing fields, tech, media, you name it.
And all of this is what the author calls the double whammy, or even the triple whammy.
Okay, explain the whammy.
So we feel like we need to achieve even more to feel good, but at the same time, our ability to do that, is often decreasing.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And that can make you do unhealthy things like becoming a workaholic or putting too much pressure on your relationships. It's a vicious cycle.
That's tough.
And as the author points out, most people don't really get it.
What do you mean?
Like they see someone who's successful and think, what do you have to complain about?
Oh, right. It's like the classic, oh, you're rich, your life must be perfect.
Exactly.
But the truth is, feeling like your abilities are slipping, like you're losing your edge, they can be devastating.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the right support system, you're kind of on your own with that.
Right. So it seems like decline, it's a part of life. It's going to happen. Yeah. But the book doesn't leave us hanging.
Oh.
It introduces this really encouraging concept called the second curve.
Okay, tell me more.
The basic idea is this. Even though some of our abilities might naturally decline as we get older, we also develop new strengths and skills.
That's good to hear.
Right. The key is recognizing and nurturing these new areas so that we can transform that decline, that potential downfall, into a whole new kind of success.
I love that. It's like, don't fight the current, ride a different wave.
Yes. And the book touches on this with the example of older academics. Maybe they shift away from super intense research and focus more on teaching and mentoring.
Ah, I see. Like passing the torch.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
And there are all these cool references to wisdom from different traditions. That Zen saying about one candle lighting another.
No, yeah, I like that word.
And Cicero wrote a whole thing about the different roles we play in the second part of life. It's all about recognizing that, experience and guidance still have so much value.
It's like a shift then, right? Yeah. From creating new knowledge, which takes that fluid intelligence we talked about, to sharing what you've already learned, applying it, using wisdom.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And, in fields that are dominated by younger people, like the tech world,
right,
the author makes a really compelling case for the value of having older professionals around.
Okay, why?
Because they've seen how things evolve. They can often see problems coming that younger folks might miss.
Ah, I see.
They're less likely to fall for the same traps. He argues that you need those seasoned pros on product teams, in marketing, and especially in leadership. Not just for fresh ideas, but for good judgment that comes from years of experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because the tech world is all about being new and cutting edge.
Right.
But maybe that constant churn can actually be a disadvantage sometimes.
For sure.
You need that balance of, young energy and old wisdom.
And this is where things get really exciting with this concept of the joys of the second curve.
Lay it on me.
So, first of all, it explains why we often hit this slump in our 40s or 50s. That feeling that our performance is dipping.
Yeah.
We're not as sharp as we used to be.
Yeah.
It's not just you. It's a thing.
Thank goodness for that.
Second, there's this whole new wave of success that actually favors the strengths that come with age.
Go.
And third, the author argues that what we gain in this second phase, things like wisdom, can be even more valuable, even though it might not be as flashy as those big achievements we racked up earlier.
Right.
He's got this great analogy. He says, knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad.
Ooh, I like that. So simple, but it gets the point across.
Right. And he even ties it back to biblical ideas about gaining wisdom in our hearts.
It's like having information is one thing,
Right.
but knowing how to use it, how to apply it in different situations, that's where the real value is.
Yes. And that's what this second curve is all about.
It's like that practical, nuanced understanding you get from years of, making decisions, seeing what works, what doesn't.
Totally. So if you're starting to feel that dip in your fluid intelligence,
Yeah.
that raw processing power we tend to have when we're younger,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean it's over. It's a sign that it's time to switch gears.
Okay.
So go from that fluid intelligence curve to the crystallized intelligence curve.
So tap into that well of experience you've built up.
Exactly. Because trying to force that old fluid intelligence to keep climbing, that's where a lot of people get stuck and frustrated.
Yeah.
The author tells this story about an older academic who felt really valued at a smaller college where his broad knowledge was appreciated.
I see.
But in the world of TV news, where it's all about what's new and flashy, well, he felt kind of lost.
That makes sense. It shows how the value of different kinds of intelligence really depends on the context.
Yes. It's all about finding the right fit.
So, okay, I'm starting to see the value of the second curve thing, but how do we actually make that jump?
Why do we get on that new curve?
The book says it's about shifting our focus from the rewards we get from that quick analytical thinking to the deeper satisfaction that comes from applying wisdom, from really leveraging all that experience we've racked up.
Makes sense.
But the author acknowledges, this is a huge mental shift, especially for people who are used to pushing through difficulties,
Oh, yeah?
not changing direction entirely.
It's like, for those of us who've achieved things by working our butts off, focusing on results,
Sadly,
this idea of pivoting to, wisdom and mentorship, it can feel like giving up.
Almost like admitting defeat.
Exactly.
And the book lays out these three big obstacles that tend to hold us back. Our addiction to achieving and feeling successful. Our attachment to all the goodies that come with success, like the money and the status.
Right.
And, of course, that deep down fear of decline itself.
Yeah, the fear is real.
It is. And then it gives us three things we need to cultivate to make that second curve a good one.
Okay, I'm all ears. Deeper, more meaningful relationships. Starting or going deeper with a spiritual journey and learning to embrace our weaknesses, not hide them.
Wow, okay.
So we're going to break all of that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's start with kicking that success addiction. The author shares this conversation he had with this super successful Wall Street woman.
Okay.
She'd made a ton of money. Everyone knew her name. But she was starting to feel like her performance wasn't what it used to be. And she was miserable. Her marriage was on the rocks. She felt distant from her kids. She realized she had, no close friends. Work had become everything. Even that wasn't bringing her joy anymore.
So classic case of putting all your eggs in one basket and then the basket starts to wobble.
Exactly. And that's when the author had this realization. People who choose that feeling of being special, being exceptional over their own happiness are actually addicts.
Addicts. Really? I mean, that's a strong word.
I know, right?
Addict.
You don't usually picture successful people when you think of addiction.
No, you think of people struggling down on their luck, not like CEOs.
But check this out.
Yeah.
The data actually shows that drinking, for example, becomes more likely the higher your education and income level. There's a theory that people in those high-pressure jobs might be using alcohol to, self-medicate.
To cope with the stress.
Yeah, and so the point is this constant need to perform, to be recognized.
Yeah.
It can turn into this compulsive behavior, just like a dependence on a drug.
Oh, I see. It's like a way to numb out those deeper feelings of emptiness or dissatisfaction.
Exactly. And then that's how you get stuck in this cycle of workaholism.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
So you achieve success by working like crazy. And then you start to believe that you have to keep up that crazy pace or else you'll fall behind.
And that fear of falling behind is the engine that keeps everything going.
Totally. And of course, that squeezes out time for everything else, like relationships. So your work becomes your whole life.
Right.
Which just feeds that workaholic cycle even more.
So it's like this. Workaholism thrives on fear and loneliness. And then loneliness and fear make you work even harder.
It's a mess. And what's crazy is that even historical figures, people we think of as giants, fell into this trap.
Who, for example?
Well, there's Winston Churchill. Battling his black dog, his melancholy, he often used work, that drive for greatness, as a way to cope.
Right.
He wrote tons during the war, even with all those demands of leading a nation.
That's like work became his refuge almost.
Yeah. And Abraham Lincoln, who struggled with some really serious depression, he did something similar.
Used work as a distraction.
Almost like a way to numb the pain.
It's like using success as a Band-Aid on a deeper wound.
It is. And it's interesting. The author actually saw this kind of withdrawal firsthand at the think tank he used to run.
Withdrawal?
Yeah, like the symptoms you see in people coming off a drug. He'd see it in people who step back from the spotlight, you know.
Oh, wow.
They'd get obsessed with their past achievement and start resenting the people who came after them.
It's like they lost their sense of identity.
Exactly. And it really shows how hard it is to let go of that identity tied to being successful.
It's like that feeling of specialness becomes like the only thing you know.
And that brings us to this idea of barnacles. It's one of those images that just sticks with you.
Okay, what are barnacles?
So it's like all those accumulated symbols of our specialness.
Ah.
You know, the trophies, the accolades, the fancy titles.
Yeah.
All that stuff that we collect along the way.
And what's the problem with that?
Well, they weigh us down, make it harder to transition to that second curve.
Yeah.
Like we're so attached to them that we can't let go, even if they don't really bring us joy anymore.
It's like that feeling of having to downsize, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like moving from a big house to a smaller apartment, and suddenly you realize, oh my gosh, I have so much stuff I don't need, but I can't bear to part with it.
Oh, it's the worst.
So how do you get rid of those barnacles?
Well, the author shares this cool story about a jade Buddha carving. The tour guide was explaining how Eastern art is often about, like, stripping away, not adding on, which is kind of the opposite of the Western mindset where it's all about collecting more trophies.
That's interesting.
Right. And it reminded me of that quote from Lao Tzu about, you know, overcoming through simplicity, finding peace in our original nature, not all this stuff we add on.
So it's like true fulfillment comes from letting go of what we don't need.
Yeah, shedding those attachments.
Yeah.
And it really hit home for the author, who's a musician. He'd always thought of life as this creative project, you know,
Yeah.
like an empty canvas that needs to be filled up. But then he realized that empty canvas metaphor, it's so ingrained in Western thinking, but it might actually be holding us back in the second half of life.
Why is that?
Because maybe this phase is more about refining, but letting go of things, not adding more.
Oh, that's a good point.
And then the book brings in Thomas Aquinas, who basically figured out why worldly rewards like power, pleasure, honor, all that stuff, they don't really make you happy in the long run.
Right.
And Aquinas was like this brilliant thinker, but his real greatness, it seems, came from rejecting those conventional ideas of success.
So he found fulfillment in something beyond worldly achievement.
Exactly. And then you have the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism offering another way of looking at this.
Okay, remind me what those are.
So the first is that, well, life kind of sucks sometimes. There's always going to be suffering.
Sure enough.
And the second truth is that this suffering comes from our craving and attachment to things, you know, especially material things.
Okay, yeah.
The third truth is that we can overcome this suffering by getting rid of those cravings. And the fourth truth says that the way to do that is through the Noble Eightfold Path.
Right, right.
And when you think about it, it's like this perfect framework for understanding why chasing worldly success doesn't really work.
It's like both Aquinas and the Buddha, they're getting at the same idea, right?
Yeah, they are.
Like, it's not that worldly rewards are bad in themselves, but they become a problem when we get too attached to them, when they become the only thing we care about.
100%. And all of this leads into this concept of homeostasis.
Yeah.
You know, that built-in drive we all have to maintain balance.
Yeah, yeah. Like our body's thermostat.
Exactly.
Keeps everything running smoothly.
And this helps explain why the thrill of success, or any kind of reward for that matter, it always fades.
Oh, how so?
Because our brain adapts.
Yeah.
It gets used to the new level, and then you need more and more to get that same kick.
And eventually you just end up feeling kind of blah, even though you're achieving more.
Exactly. And the book actually uses a funny example. The author talks about drinking way too much espresso when he was in 7th grade.
Oh, I've been there.
Right. But it makes a good point.
Yeah.
It's about how our bodies fight to maintain that equilibrium, even when we're doing things that throw it off.
And that principle applies to more than just like caffeine or sugar.
Oh, absolutely.
It's about our emotions, our drive for success, everything.
Right.
And this brings us to the hedonic treadmill, I think.
Yes. So it's like we get on this treadmill where we need to keep achieving more and more just to stay in the same place emotionally.
Just to avoid feeling like a failure.
Exactly.
It's exhausting.
It is. And the book puts it in this really simple equation. success equals having more than others
You-
all the time.
You're always comparing yourself.
Yeah, always looking over your shoulder. And
Yeah.
the problem is, to really feel satisfied, you have to be running faster than everyone else on this treadmill.
There's no finish line?
Nope. Oof. That's brutal.
It is. And here's another twist. It turns out that failure, like the experience of having less, is actually a really powerful motivator, too.
Really?
Yeah. We're wired to avoid loss. Like, our resistance to losing something is stronger than our desire to gain something new. Psychologists even have a term for it: loss aversion.
Loss aversion. Got it. The author's dad was like this classic pessimist,
Yeah.
always expecting the worst.
Oh, I know the type.
Right. But he said his dad actually explained it to him once.
Oh, what did he say?
He said, if you don't expect too much, you'll never be disappointed.
Oh, there you go. Loss aversion in action.
Right. And this all ties back to that fear of decline.
Uh-huh. The fear that looms over everything.
Exactly. There's this great anecdote about a CEO, super driven guy who, when the author brought up the idea of decline, just brushed it off.
What did he say?
He said he was going to keep going harder and harder until the wheels come off.
Wow.
And that's when the author brings in this really thought-provoking quote from Ernest Becker. Becker basically says that the fear of death is this, fundamental part of the human experience.
Oh, I think I've heard that one.
He goes on to outline 8 different dimensions of this fear, like the fear of complete annihilation, the fear of what happens to our loved ones after we're gone, the fear of, the unknown.
Wow, yeah.
It's pretty intense stuff.
So it's like this fear of death is always lurking in the background, influencing how we live.
Exactly. And maybe even driving that relentless pursuit of success.
Because we're trying to leave a mark, to create something that outlasts us.
Right. Like symbolic immortality.
Right. And it's funny, the author mentions Walt Disney.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently he was terrified of death. He even had nightmares about an owl, which, I don't know, that's a pretty specific fear.
It is. But it's interesting because his big breakthrough with, Steamboat Willie was quickly followed by this cartoon called The Skeleton Dance.
From Mickey Mouse to skeletons, that's quite a shift.
Right. And his distributor at the time actually didn't like it. He wanted more, lighthearted stuff.
More mice, fewer skeletons.
Exactly.
Maybe it's like, as a society, we'd rather not think about death too much.
Yeah.
It's easier to focus on the happy stuff.
And the author makes this interesting point about, there's the fear of actual physical death.
Yeah.
But then there's this other kind of death, which is professional decline.
Becoming irrelevant.
Exactly. He calls it becoming a professional Struldbrug.
Struldbrug? What's that?
So it's a creature from this old book, Gulliver's Travels, and they're basically immortal, but they keep aging and declining, and everyone treats them like a burden.
Oh, yikes.
So it's this idea of being, stuck in a role where you're not effective anymore, but you just keep going and people feel sorry for you or maybe even annoyed.
Yeah, that's a much worse fate than just retiring gracefully, isn't it?
It is. And the author argues that a lot of us, we try to create this legacy, like Achilles choosing a short, glorious life instead of a long, forgotten one.
Right, right.
But it often doesn't work. Think of that movie about Schmidt. Or all those retired CEOs who go from being in every who's who to, who's he in a few months. It's like the world keeps spinning and eventually everyone forgets.
So maybe there's a better way to approach this whole legacy thing.
The book talks about this distinction between resume virtues and eulogy virtues.
Okay, explain.
So resume virtues are like all those skills and achievements we put on our resumes, right?
Yeah.
But eulogy virtues, those are the qualities people will actually talk about at your funeral. The things that really matter.
Like kindness, generosity, compassion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the author suggests that it's a good exercise to actually think about what you'd want people to say at your funeral.
To figure out what you truly value.
Yeah, because that's the stuff that really matters in the end.
Yeah.
And then there's the big question, how do you actually deal with that fear of decline?
Right.
The author, and I kind of like this, suggests that you have to stare it right in the face.
Confront it head on.
Like exposure therapy, You expose yourself to the thing you're afraid of, and eventually it loses its power.
Makes sense.
He even quotes Montaigne, who said that we should, get used to the idea of death.
That's a good one.
And the funny thing is, thinking about death can actually make life feel more meaningful right now. E.M. Forster said, death destroys a man. The idea of death saves him, because it makes you realize that, your time is limited. Every moment counts.
Makes it more precious.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And there's even this Buddhist meditation called Maranasati, which is basically mindfulness of death.
Mindfulness of death. Okay.
And it's pretty intense. You have to visualize like all the stages of a decomposing body.
Oh, wow.
It's a very direct way to deal.